Welcome to St. Louis on the Air. I'm Sarah Fensky. Picture this. You're driving on the highway when you get pulled over. The police rifle through your car, and then they help themselves to any cash they find, pushing you to sign a waiver that relinquishes your rights to the money. They say if you don't sign, you could be looking at years in prison. Sounds crazy? Well, it's actually a long-standing process throughout the country. And as journalist Bill Freivogel discovered, it's alive and well in Missouri. Local police agencies routinely seize large amounts of cash without ever charging suspects. They use that money to build new headquarters or buy military equipment or, in one case, even a margarita maker. It's called asset forfeiture, and Freivogel has been covering this issue in depth in the past year in a series called Taken. Those stories were reported in conjunction with the Pulitzer Center on Crisis Reporting, and they are now live on the St. Louis Public Radio website. The state of Missouri has had a law for decades aimed at cracking down on abuses of this practice, but law enforcement agencies have found a way around these reforms. And Bill Freivogel is here today to talk to us about what's going on with all this. Bill is a professor at the Southern Illinois University Carbondale School of Journalism. And of course, regular listeners will know Bill as a member of our legal roundtable because he's also a lawyer. So Bill, welcome back to the show.
Hi.
So what's your sense? How often is asset forfeiture being used locally?
Well, an example would be St. Charles County. There were 39 cases this past year in which people were stopped right around mile marker 204, which is out in western St. Charles County. And they were stopped for the police thought they looked suspicious. If they maybe were driving a rental car. Maybe they had information about them. They were driving in a funny manner. Then they look for some sort of a traffic problem. Maybe they're following a car too closely, or they get on that rumble strip on the right of the highway, pull them off, start asking questions. If their stories don't hang together, then they pursue it. In St. Charles County, what they have a practice of taking the people they're suspicious of to a place called Superior Towing, which is not far away from mile marker 204. And so then at this towing lot, they will tell the people they have stopped. Generally, they will have found large amounts of cash, $10,000, $20,000, $100,000 worth of cash, and they'll tell them, "Look, if you don't waive your ownership of that property, you and you're going to be in jail for a long time. It's going to be a long time till you see your family." Lawyers like Justin Gelfand is from St. Louis County, a former federal prosecutor himself, say this is a really coercive kind of interrogation process.
Because you're just here in a tow lot.
In a tow lot, right? I mean, it's you hear about police, a person being taken in to a headquarters, to a police department for questioning, but you don't hear them being taken to a private tow lot and then their car being sort of taken apart, and then these handy waivers. I'm waiving ownership of anything in the car. Are provided to the people to sign away their property.
And you said in St. Charles County, I believe you said 39 times this happened
39
last
times
year?
it happened last year. About $2.6 million was involved. No criminal charges were filed in any of those cases. The money is then sent along to the federal government. It's called the Federal Equitable Sharing Program. And the local police jurisdiction gets back 80%. By sending it along to the federal government, the provisions of state law are washed away. So the state has a very, would seem on its face to be a really tough law. It says police can't take people's property unless they have there's a state crime. Proof beyond a reasonable doubt.
You'd actually have to charge them with this crime.
Actually have to charge them, and the money should go to the schools. But once you've washed those requirements away, then there doesn't have to be proof beyond a reasonable doubt, just preponderance of the evidence, 50% plus a fraction. And the money goes back, 80% of the money then goes back from the federal government to the local police organization to use as permitted.
So this is where we're seeing things like the famous margarita maker. They don't have to give the money to the schools. It's just going into their own pockets.
Now, I looked at 3 years ending in 2017 and 2 cents on the dollar went to the state school to schools.
Wow.
Almost all the rest of it ended up in the hands of the police agency. So the problem with this, according to the critics, is it gives the police an incentive to try to seize cash from people on the highway. In order to, because then they can use that cash.
This is giving more money for their department.
More money for their department. So they have an incentive to stop people.
Now, it's interesting you talk about how this state law seems like a pretty good law, that it's got the right purposes here. And my understanding from reading your series was this was an attempt to reform this process.
Right.
And yet it just hasn't worked.
Yeah, way back in 1991, a couple of former colleagues of mine, Lou Rose and Tim Poor, wrote a series called Hooked on the Drug Laws that showed that police departments were getting a lot of money from these stops. And so the legislature passed a bill. Wayne Good, who was known for his good government proposals, got it all through. That had this requirement of proof beyond a reasonable doubt, money to the schools. The head of the federal drug agency went in to see Governor Carnahan, said, please veto this bill. Mike Wolf told me this story.
The former Supreme Court Justice,
who at that time was a lawyer for Carnahan. Mike said, it doesn't seem to me like the drug war is working that well anyway. Let's not veto it. And they didn't. But it didn't take long to get a workaround.
With this federal program.
Yeah.
And in order to go under the federal program, they just have to come up with some federal crime that might possibly be implicated?
Yeah, I mean, there has to be some connection. There has to be some sort of federal connection. But just if a car has come from Illinois, that's enough.
That's enough, because it's crossing state lines.
And the amount of proof they need is really not that great. I mean, they're either like 50.1%, so that's like maybe this person fits the profile of a drug courier, they're driving a rental car, they look nervous, their story doesn't hang together. Bingo.
That's enough.
50.1%. Or a drug dog sniffs. They often ask, will you permit the drug dog to sniff the cash we found? And if the drug dog reacts positively to a smell of, say, marijuana, then bingo, again, that's enough to take the money.
Now, you mentioned Justin Gelfand. He's a former federal prosecutor who's now in private practice, and he has some serious concerns about the process.
But the idea that law enforcement should somehow have the right to take things from people and then keep them for their own benefit, that's insane.
And that's Justin Gelfand. So the U.S. Supreme Court, this must have come to their attention at some point. They're okay with this happening.
Well, maybe and maybe not. There was a case way back in the 1990s in which they said it involved John and Tina Bennis. John Bennis was cheating on Tina in the family car, consorting with prostitutes. The police took the car. Tina said, hey, I'm the victim here, and the car's half mine. The Supreme Court said the car is a criminal. I mean, this is the whole kind of legal fiction that this is based on, that the property is the criminal. And so the car is the criminal. They voted 5-4 to say that, Tina, you don't have any ownership of that car anymore. But then just this past year, earlier this year, Justice Ginsburg wrote an opinion for a unanimous Supreme Court in a case involving a fellow by the name of Tyson Timbs. Tyson Timbs had a Land Rover. He sold some heroin out of the Land Rover. He was convicted and fined $10,000. But the police also took the Land Rover, which was worth $40,000. So the question was, isn't that an excessive fine in violation of the Eighth Amendment of the Constitution? Indiana said, hey, we don't have to follow the Eighth Amendment of the Constitution. Supreme Court said, you got to be kidding. And so yes, states have to follow the excessive fines clause. Well, Shamit Dogan, a representative from Baldwin, said, well, if that's the case, surely taking $40,000 or $100,000 from someone where you don't have any proof of a crime at all, that surely has to be an excessive fine. And
yeah, have they dealt with that dichotomy at all?
So he got a bill through his House committee, which but then ran into sort of a silent or a quiet police lobbying campaign. The police didn't actually come and testify before his committee, but they went around to other legislators, and Holly Rader, a Republican head of the Rules Committee from Sikeston, killed the bill. She said, work with the police, try to work out a compromise. Police didn't want to compromise.
Huh. So they're at this point sort of saying, we just like things the way they are.
Yeah, right.
So we actually have some audio that you gathered in your reporting of Representative Dogan talking about his concerns about the program and the reaction that his criticism got from its proponents.
They got offended when I used the phrase policing for profit. And I found that curious because I don't know what else you call it when you have police who refer to this as pennies from heaven, when you have people who are subject to having their property taken and given to law enforcement because they circumvent the system where this money is supposed to go to public schools. The auditor's report from Auditor Galloway this year showed that we had a record number of funds seized, $9 million. Only 1% of that money ended up being done through the state forfeiture program. 1% went back to the public schools.
That's Representative Shama Dogan, who would really like to reform these laws. He mentions this audit from State Auditor Nicole Galloway. Was she overall critical of how this is being deployed?
Well, she makes really clear in her audit that it's just her job to report these numbers, that this is not an audit looking at, is this a good practice or a bad practice? She just reports how much money was seized and by jurisdiction. And then we filed a bunch of Freedom of Information Act Sunshine Law requests, which enabled us to locate, to get the details on where are the stops occurring. That's why we know about the mile marker 204, and how many of the cases are resulting in criminal charges. None.
Wow. But, on one hand, critics of the program, they do have some really good arguments. There's also some people who have defended this program, and one of them is St. Charles County Prosecutor Tim Lomar. He defended the process to you and your associates. Let's listen.
The reality is we're not taking property from innocent people. We are taking illegal proceeds that don't belong to these people. These are all proceeds of drug trafficking.
And that's St. Charles County Prosecutor Tim Lomar. Do you think he has a point?
Well, I think he has a point. And I think probably a lot of the proceeds that they seize are from drug mules who are taking money back from the drug transaction. It's interesting that these law enforcement agencies set up their stops along the westbound lanes because they want the cash, not the drugs. So the drugs get to our communities, but the cash gets to the police departments. But yeah, I think he does have a point. But then Justin Gelfand and other critics will say, well, yes, there are some drug couriers who are getting stopped. On the other hand, a lot of innocent people are getting stopped, and the people don't realize how many people really are not in the banking economy, that they actually do carry large amounts of cash with them and are not drug couriers. Maybe they're going to buy a car, maybe they're going to buy a business, maybe it's proceeds from a small business that they run, and he finds that a lot of these folks, maybe they are illegal immigrants.
Did you see any racial dynamics in terms of the data that you found?
Yeah, about half of the cases had surnames of Hispanics or other immigrant possibilities. In Phelps County, we found about 2/3 of the people who are stopped there, which is on Highway 44, another big area where this police tactic is used. We found about 2/3 of the people had Hispanic surnames.
Okay. So maybe they'd point to the fact that, these are people involved in the drug trade, but it also might be a case where a lot of people are getting pulled over who are unbanked, as you say.
Unbanked, yes.
Now, you've done a year's worth of stories on civil asset forfeiture in Missouri. Do you see more work to be done here journalistically, or have you written the book?
It's certainly the law certainly hasn't been changed. Tony Lavasco is sort of taking over for Shama Dogan. He's got a bill, it's House Bill 1776, it wouldn't keep the police from seizing the cash, but it would keep the cash from coming back from the federal government to the police agency. So
it would then go to the schools?
So then, actually, I guess if It would depend on what the local agency did. They would no longer have the incentive to send it through the federal government because that's how they get it back.
Oh, okay.
So if they didn't have that incentive, maybe they wouldn't send it through the schools, and then they'd have to go through the state process. But
And then they have to charge people with the
then
crime.
have to charge people the crime. But in almost all these cases, they don't have evidence of a state crime because it's not illegal. It's not a violation of Missouri law to drive around with a lot of money.
Yeah. So that bill is currently pending.
But yeah, it's been introduced. There's nothing is scheduled on it. I mean, we're just at the beginning of the legislative session, but it's going to be an uphill climb, I think.
Another uphill climb on this issue. Well, Bill Freivogel, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
And if people want to find those stories, I know you have a homepage for them that's there on the St. Louis Public Radio site.
Right.
Okay. You want to check that out? It's called Taken. This is St. Louis on the Air on St. Louis Public Radio, 90.7 KWMU.
Support comes from the Missouri Forest Products Association, providing more than 41,000 jobs in the production of wood pallets, railroad ties, white oak barrels, hardwood floors, and more. Details at choosewood.com.